Love is supposed to be beautiful, but for most it's a battlefield soaked in tears, regret, and agony. Why? Because most people do not truly understand what love is. They believe love is possession. They believe love is control. And worst of all, they believe love is sacrifice. The brutal truth? Most of the pain you feel in love is self-inflicted. You hand over your happiness to someone else like a slave presenting their chains. You cling, you crave, you demand. Because somewhere along the line, you convinced yourself that love means losing yourself for someone else's approval. It's a lie, and it's a lie you keep telling yourself, even as it destroys you. Stoicism teaches us that the root of pain is not love itself. It's the attachment, the expectation, the desperation to possess something that was never yours to control. You see love as a cure for your loneliness, a remedy for your insecurities, a shield against the harshness of existence. But love was never meant to save you. It was meant to complement you. The moment you base your happiness on someone else's presence, you give them the power to destroy you. You cling to their affection like a lifeline, terrified of losing what you never truly had control over. And when they disappoint you, because they will, you feel betrayed, as if they owed you something they never promised to give. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But how often do you relinquish that power? How often do you sacrifice your own peace for someone else's approval, affection, or acceptance? The pain you feel is not because you loved too deeply. It's because you loved with attachment. You loved with expectation. You loved with desperation. But there is another way. A way to love fiercely and passionately without succumbing to the agony of dependence. A way to experience connection without sacrificing your own mind. A way to give without expecting anything in return. If you find these insights valuable, like, share, and subscribe to Victory Stoic. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever loved in a way that broke you? Or have you found a way to love without pain? Your story could be the key that helps someone else break free. Today, you will learn how to love without suffering, how to care deeply without falling apart, how to build relationships rooted in strength, not weakness. Let's begin. Number 1. Detach without discarding. To love and to lose is not the greatest tragedy. To love and to cling, that is the source of suffering. Seneca. This quote echoes a fundamental Stoic teaching, that attachment, not love itself, causes pain. The Stoics understood that the more you cling to something, the more power you give it over your emotions. The key to loving without pain is to detach without discarding, to appreciate without clinging, to cherish without imprisoning. Consider the story of Amanda Collins, a marketing executive from Los Angeles. Amanda had been in a relationship with her college sweetheart, Ben, for over 7 years. They had built a life together, shared dreams, traveled the world, and made countless memories. But as their relationship grew, so did her fear of losing him. She became increasingly possessive, constantly needing reassurance that their bond was secure. Every disagreement felt like a threat, every moment apart like a warning. The tighter she held on, the more strained their relationship became. Amanda's desperation to preserve their love made her blind to the very thing she was destroying. Ben began to feel suffocated, his freedom eroded by her constant need for validation. Eventually, the relationship ended, not because of lack of love, but because of her inability to let go. Amanda was left devastated, not just by the loss of Ben, but by the realization that her own insecurities had driven him away. After months of emotional turmoil, Amanda stumbled upon the writings of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. She was struck by their emphasis on detachment, on valuing things for what they are rather than what we wish them to be. She realized that her love for Ben had been distorted by her own fears and insecurities. Instead of cherishing the relationship, she had tried to control it. Instead of appreciating Ben's presence, she had become obsessed with preventing his absence. Amanda decided to embark on a journey of emotional detachment, not by rejecting love, but by learning to appreciate it without clinging. She began practicing Stoic exercises designed to cultivate a healthier mindset. One of the most powerful techniques she discovered was negative visualization, a practice described by Seneca in his writings. By imagining the loss of something you value, you learn to appreciate it more deeply and to prepare yourself for the possibility of its absence. This practice doesn't make you cold or indifferent. It makes you resilient. Every morning, Amanda would spend 10 minutes in meditation, visualizing a life without the people and things she valued most. At first, the exercise was painful, her mind resisting the thought of losing those she loved. But over time, she found that this practice brought her peace. By confronting her fears directly, she stripped them of their power. She no longer needed to control everything around her. She no longer needed constant reassurance. She learned to cherish moments without clinging to them. Psychologically, Amanda's transformation was rooted in a well-documented principle known as cognitive reappraisal. According to research published in the journal Emotion by Gross and John, 2003, cognitive reappraisal is the process of changing the way you interpret a situation in order to alter its emotional impact. By intentionally imagining loss, Amanda was able to reshape her emotional response to it. Instead of fear, she experienced gratitude. Instead of anxiety, she experienced acceptance. But Amanda's journey didn't end with introspection alone. She applied her newfound understanding to her everyday life. When she began dating again, she made a conscious effort to approach relationships differently. Instead of clinging to her partner, she focused on enjoying their time together without imposing unrealistic expectations. Instead of demanding constant validation, she cultivated inner confidence. The results were profound. Her relationships became healthier, more balanced, and more fulfilling. To apply this principle in your own life, start by practicing negative visualization. Each day, spend a few minutes imagining the loss of something you deeply care about. Visualize it vividly. Feel the absence. Allow yourself to confront the discomfort. This is not about embracing pessimism. It's about building emotional resilience. When you finish the exercise, take a moment to appreciate the presence of that person or thing in your life. This practice will help you detach from the fear of loss, allowing you to enjoy your relationships without the burden of clinging. Another effective technique is journaling, a method endorsed by Marcus Aurelius himself. The Roman emperor would often write about his fears, desires, and attachments, dissecting them with ruthless honesty. By putting your thoughts on paper, you gain clarity. You can separate what truly matters from what is merely a product of fear or insecurity. Amanda also embraced a practice known as self-reflection through solitude. She would spend at least 1 hour each week in complete isolation, free from distractions, where she could focus solely on her thoughts and emotions. This practice allowed her to identify patterns of clinging and attachment, to confront them, and to gradually release their hold over her. But the most powerful shift Amanda experienced came from understanding that detachment does not mean indifference. She didn't stop loving, she stopped fearing. She didn't stop caring, she stopped clinging. By releasing her need to control the outcome of her relationships, she discovered a new kind of freedom, one rooted in acceptance rather than attachment. The Stoics taught that true freedom comes from within. As Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. When you cling to something or someone, you are giving away your freedom. You are allowing external forces to dictate your emotional state. But when you detach, when you learn to appreciate without clinging, you regain control over your own mind. Ultimately, to love without pain is to love without fear. It is to understand that everything you cherish is transient, that nothing is truly yours to keep. But rather than making love shallow or meaningless, this understanding makes it deeper and more precious. You learn to appreciate the present moment for what it is, rather than what you wish it to be. The lesson Amanda learned, and the lesson the Stoics have taught for centuries, is that detachment is not about rejection. It is about appreciation. It is about finding joy in what you have, without being destroyed by its loss. By practicing detachment, you not only protect yourself from unnecessary suffering, you enhance your ability to love with clarity, depth, and resilience. Number 2, love is a choice, not a necessity. Foolishness is expecting another to complete you. Wisdom is knowing you are already whole. Epictetus. The Stoics were relentless in their pursuit of truth, and their scrutiny of love was no exception. To them, love was not a prison where one languished, waiting to be rescued. It was not a plea for validation or a desperate grasp for meaning. It was a choice, a conscious act of will. not a desperate necessity. The problem with most modern relationships is that they are built on a lie. A seductive, poisonous lie sold to us by movies, songs, and sentimental nonsense. You complete me. The phrase sounds romantic until you peel away its glossy surface and reveal the insecurity festering beneath. What it truly says is, I am incomplete. I am insufficient. I am a hollow shell waiting to be filled by another. It is the ultimate abdication of self-respect. Consider Jacob Tanner, a 36-year-old architect from Chicago. Jacob was the kind of man who thrived on validation. Every project he completed, every award he received, felt hollow until it was acknowledged by others. His relationships were no different. He craved affection not as a gift to be shared, but as a balm to soothe his own inadequacies. When he met Laura, a brilliant and fiercely independent graphic designer, he became enamored with her. But it was not genuine affection, it was an addiction. Jacob's need for Laura grew obsessive. He called her multiple times a day, bombarded her with messages, constantly sought her approval. His insecurity painted every conversation with suspicion, every moment of silence with dread. And when Laura inevitably left him, he collapsed into despair, cursing her for not loving him enough, when the truth was he had never loved her at all. He had only used her as a crutch to support his own weakness. Jacob's story is not unique. It is a tragedy played out by millions. People who confuse love with dependence, passion with desperation. The Stoics would call this weakness, not affection. To the Stoics, love was never meant to be a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. It was an enhancement to an already fulfilled life, not the scaffolding upon which one's entire sense of self was built. The fundamental problem Jacob faced was that he believed love was something he needed, rather than something he chose. He approached it like a starving man approaches a feast, with desperation and greed. And when the feast was taken away, he was left starving once more. Modern psychology supports what the Stoics preached centuries ago. Research published by the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology highlights the concept of attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and fearful avoidant. People like Jacob, who approach love from a place of need rather than choice, often exhibit anxious attachment. They become overly dependent on their partners, seeking constant reassurance and validation. Their fear of rejection drives them to cling tightly, ultimately suffocating the very relationship they seek to preserve. But love, as the Stoics understood it, was not meant to be a frantic, all-consuming fire. It was meant to be a steady, enduring flame, one that warms but never burns. To love out of necessity is to hand over your power, to place your happiness in the hands of another, and hope they will treat it with care. It is a gamble, and a reckless one at that. If love is a choice, then it must begin with self-sufficiency. This is not about building walls or rejecting intimacy. It is about acknowledging that your worth does not depend on the affection of another. It is about understanding that you are complete as you are, and that love is a gift you offer, not a commodity you demand. Imagine love as a lavish banquet laid out before you. The dishes are exquisite, the aroma intoxicating. But if you approach it as a starving man, you devour without appreciation, gorging yourself until you are sickened by excess. But if you approach it with contentment, with a full stomach and a clear mind, you savor each bite, appreciating it for what it is, not for what you lack. Jacob eventually realized this truth, though the journey was brutal. After months of wallowing in self-pity, he forced himself into solitude. He cut off all distractions, dedicating his days to reflection and self-improvement. He read the works of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and began to understand that his suffering was not the result of lost love, but of misguided dependency. He wrote down his thoughts each morning, dissecting his emotions with merciless precision. Through journaling, he confronted his neediness, his insecurity, his misplaced longing for validation. And slowly he began to rebuild himself, piece by piece. Jacob embraced what the Stoics called autarkia, self-sufficiency. He focused on his career, not for the accolades, but for the satisfaction of doing good work. He built friendships based on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. And most importantly, he learned to enjoy his own company. When Jacob eventually entered a new relationship, it was not born from desperation. It was a choice, deliberate, conscious, and free from the corrosive need for approval. His affection was no longer a transaction, but a genuine offering. And when that relationship eventually ended, as all things must, Jacob did not collapse into despair. He appreciated what he had experienced and moved on with grace. The lesson Jacob learned is the same lesson the Stoics taught centuries ago. Love is not a requirement for happiness. It is not something you need in order to feel complete. It is a choice, one made freely, without fear or desperation. When you approach love from a place of abundance rather than scarcity, you transform it into something pure, resilient, and beautiful. To apply this principle in your own life, start by asking yourself one simple question. If I were completely whole and content as I am, would I still choose to love this person? If the answer is yes, then your love is authentic. But if the answer is no, then you are not loving. You are clinging. You are grasping at another person like a lifeline, rather than sharing your journey with them. To love without pain is to love without need. It is to recognize that you are complete and that love is a gift, not a necessity. When you love from a place of freedom, you offer something precious and rare. And when you accept love without clinging, you experience it in its purest, most powerful form. Number 3, do not outsource your happiness. Happiness depends upon ourselves. Aristotle. The ancient philosophers understood that real happiness comes from within, not from anything external. And yet, most people still make the same mistake. They place their happiness in the hands of others. They rely on their partner's approval, their friends' validation, or their family's acceptance to feel complete. But when you give others the power to control your emotions, you give away your freedom. Think about this. If your happiness depends on someone else's actions or words, then you are forever at their mercy. They have the power to lift you up or tear you down. Your peace of mind becomes a hostage to their behavior. And that is not real happiness. It is a form of emotional slavery. Consider the story of Jack Reynolds, a young man from Seattle who worked tirelessly to build his own business. For years, he sacrificed his social life, his health, and even his own passions to meet the expectations of his parents. They wanted him to be successful, and he wanted nothing more than to make them proud. His happiness was tied directly to their approval, and for a while, things seemed fine. Jack's business grew, his parents praised him, and he felt validated. But then the pandemic hit, and Jack's business began to struggle. Suddenly, the praise stopped. His parents questioned his decisions, criticized his efforts, and made him feel like a failure. Jack's confidence collapsed because his happiness depended entirely on their approval. Without it, he felt worthless. One night, after a particularly harsh conversation with his father, Jack sat alone in his apartment, feeling completely defeated. That's when he stumbled upon a quote from Marcus Aurelius. "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." The words hit him like a punch. He realized that his mistake wasn't failing in business, it was giving away the key to his own happiness. Jack decided to rebuild, not just his business, but his entire mindset. He started journaling every morning, reflecting on what genuinely made him feel fulfilled. He wrote down his values, his passions, and the things that brought him joy, independent of anyone else's opinion. He discovered that he loved his work, not because it made his parents proud, but because it challenged him, inspired him, and allowed him to create something meaningful. Jack began to understand that happiness was not something others could give or take away. It was something he had to build from within. And as he made this shift, his entire perspective changed. He stopped chasing approval and started focusing on his own growth. His business improved, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because he was genuinely passionate about what he was doing. And even when things went wrong, his happiness remained intact because it was no longer dependent on anyone else. Modern psychology supports this Stoic insight. Studies have shown that internal locus of control, the belief that you are responsible for your own happiness and outcomes, leads to greater well-being, resilience, and satisfaction. On the other hand, those with an external locus of control, who place their happiness in the hands of others or external circumstances, often experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. When you place your happiness in someone else's hands, you are giving them control over your emotional state. This makes you vulnerable, reactive, and easily manipulated. You become like a boat tossed around by the waves, with no control over your own direction. But when you reclaim that power, you become the captain of your own ship. You decide your course, regardless of the storm raging around you. So, how can you stop outsourcing your happiness? The first step is recognizing where you've been doing it. Ask yourself, who or what have I been relying on for my happiness? It could be a partner, a parent, a friend, or even social media approval. Once you identify the source, you can begin to take back control. A simple but effective exercise is to make a list of everything that genuinely brings you joy. Not what impresses others, not what earns you praise, but what truly makes you feel fulfilled. Maybe it's reading, exercising, learning something new, or working on a personal project. These are your sources of happiness, and the beauty is they belong to you and no one else. Another technique is mindful gratitude. Every morning, write down 3 things you are grateful for that are completely independent of other people's opinions. It could be your health, your creativity, your ability to learn, or simply the fact that you woke up to a new day. Practicing gratitude helps you focus on what you have rather than what you lack, and it builds a mindset of contentment that doesn't rely on external validation. Meditation is also a powerful tool. Spend just 10 minutes a day in silence, focusing on your breath and allowing your thoughts to come and go without judgment. This practice helps you reconnect with yourself and understand that your happiness doesn't need to be tethered to anyone else's approval. Epictetus, the great Stoic philosopher, taught that no man is free who is not master of himself. The more you depend on others for happiness, the less control you have over your own life. Freedom comes from understanding that true joy is built from within. Jack learned this lesson the hard way. But once he made that shift, everything else in his life began to fall into place. His relationships improved because he no longer needed constant reassurance. His work became more fulfilling because he was driven by passion rather than fear of disappointment. And most importantly, he discovered a sense of peace that no one could take away. Happiness is not something to be earned or granted by others. It is something you build within yourself. It is a fortress constructed from your own values, passions, and principles. And when you build it well, nothing and no one can tear it down. To reclaim your happiness, start by asking yourself, if everyone else's opinion was taken away, what would still bring me joy? When you find the answer, you will have discovered something priceless, something no one can ever take from you. Number 4, accept impermanence. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Heraclitus. This ancient truth, though not strictly Stoic, aligns perfectly with the Stoic understanding of the world's inherent transience. To the Stoics, the acceptance of impermanence was not a cause for despair, but a foundation for resilience, clarity, and inner peace. The universe itself is in constant flux. Nothing remains unchanged, not the seasons, not the mountains, not even the stars. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote extensively about the fleeting nature of existence. Observe constantly that all things take place by change, he wrote in Meditations. Accustom yourself to consider that whatever is produced by change, that to change is part of nature, and nothing is evil by nature. The Stoics believe that clinging to permanence in a world ruled by change is a recipe for suffering. And nowhere is this more evident than in matters of the heart. Relationships, no matter how deep or passionate, are subject to the same natural law of impermanence. Feelings evolve, circumstances shift, and people change. To expect love to remain frozen in time is to fight against the very nature of existence. Consider the story of Sarah and Daniel, a couple who met in college and fell in love with the intensity of youth. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion, exploration, and discovery. They moved in together, built a life around shared dreams, and for a time, it felt perfect. But as the years went by, their interests diverged. Sarah became increasingly dedicated to her career as a writer, while Daniel found his passion in wildlife conservation, spending months away on expeditions. Their love didn't end in a single dramatic moment. It faded gradually, like a fire that burns intensely but is never replenished. Sarah felt betrayed by the loss of their closeness, while Daniel struggled to reconcile his own desires with the relationship they had built. Both clung to the memory of what once was, refusing to accept the simple truth. everything changes. The pain Sarah felt was not merely due to the natural drift between them. It was her refusal to accept that their relationship had evolved. She clung to the past, comparing every moment to the intensity of their early days, and punishing herself for not being able to recreate those moments. It was only when she began reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius that she realized the root of her suffering. The Stoic approach to impermanence is not about rejecting emotions or avoiding relationships. It is about embracing the truth that all things are transient. To love without suffering, you must accept that love itself is subject to change. Feelings are like waves. They rise and fall, but their value is not diminished by their impermanence. Sarah began practicing a Stoic exercise known as negative visualization, a technique designed to help one appreciate what they have by imagining its absence. Every morning, she would spend a few minutes reflecting on her relationship with Daniel, not as a failure, but as something beautiful that had simply changed form. She acknowledged her gratitude for the time they had shared, rather than mourning its loss. And with that acceptance came peace. Modern psychology supports the Stoic view of impermanence. Research in acceptance and commitment therapy, AT, emphasizes the importance of accepting thoughts and feelings rather than trying to fight or control them. The act of acceptance helps individuals reduce psychological suffering and build resilience. Studies have shown that those who accept the transient nature of their emotions are less likely to suffer from chronic anxiety and depression. Imagine your emotions as leaves floating on a river. If you try to grab them, they crumble and disintegrate in your hands. But if you simply watch them pass, appreciating their beauty for the brief moment they exist, you find peace. The river continues to flow, carrying new leaves, new experiences, and that is the nature of life. The same principle applies to love. To expect it to remain static is like demanding that the river stop flowing. It is an impossible request. Instead, the Stoic learns to appreciate the river as it is, to marvel at its movement, its unpredictability, its ever-changing beauty. By embracing impermanence, you liberate yourself from the futile struggle to keep things as they were. You allow yourself to love fully, without the crippling fear of loss. To apply this principle in your own life, try the following exercise. Every evening, write down 3 things you cherish about your relationship or a person you love. Then, imagine that these things are taken away, not in a morbid way, but as a recognition of life's natural uncertainty. This practice will deepen your appreciation for what you have while preparing your mind to accept the inevitability of change. Another useful practice is journaling for acceptance. Write about your most cherished relationships and confront the possibility of their evolution or even their end. Describe how you would respond to such changes with grace and understanding. This process allows you to strengthen your resilience before hardship occurs. Sarah eventually made peace with her evolving relationship with Daniel. She realized that their love was not a failure simply because it had changed. It was an experience, a beautiful chapter in her life that she could appreciate without clinging to the past. Instead of resenting the distance between them, she found joy in their continued friendship and the personal growth that their separation had inspired. The Stoics teach us that acceptance is not resignation. It is not about giving up or surrendering to despair. It is about recognizing reality for what it is and adapting accordingly. When you accept impermanence, you free yourself from the chains of unrealistic expectations. You learn to love deeply without the burden of possession. Ultimately, to love without pain is to love without illusion. It is to embrace the present moment without demanding that it remain unchanged. Just as the river flows, so too does life. And when you learn to flow with it rather than against it, you find a kind of freedom that nothing can take away. Number 5, understand yourself before loving others. To know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. Socrates. While not strictly a Stoic, Socrates' teaching lays the foundation for one of the most critical principles in Stoic philosophy, understanding oneself. The Stoics believe that clarity of mind and purpose is essential not only for inner peace, but also for building healthy relationships. Without knowing who you are, what you value, and what you truly desire, your love for others is likely to be distorted, misguided, or rooted in insecurity. Loving someone without understanding yourself is like navigating a ship without a compass. You may drift toward affection, but you will eventually lose your way. Instead of building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared values, you risk constructing something fragile, dependent on external validation rather than inner strength. Consider the story of Ryan Carter, a 30-year-old lawyer from Boston. Driven, ambitious, and determined to succeed, Ryan spent years pursuing a career he wasn't passionate about. His parents had encouraged him to follow a path that promised stability and prestige. Though he excelled professionally, he felt hollow inside. His identity had been constructed around meeting the expectations of others, rather than fulfilling his own desires. This lack of self-awareness extended into his romantic relationships. Ryan found himself constantly trying to please his partners, molding his interests, habits, and even values to fit their preferences. He became a chameleon, constantly adapting but never authentic. Every failed relationship left him feeling more confused and alienated from himself. The more he tried to find happiness through others, the further he drifted from his true self. It wasn't until Ryan read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations that he began to question his own motivations. One passage struck him deeply. Man must consider not only his own being, but his own governing principle, his own nature, and the manner of his constitution. Marcus Aurelius emphasized the importance of understanding oneself, of examining one's own mind and desires without distraction or illusion. Ryan decided to confront his own ignorance about himself. He took a 3-month hiatus from dating, choosing instead to focus on introspection. He began a daily journaling practice inspired by the Stoics. Each morning he wrote down his thoughts, goals, fears, and desires, and for the first time, he allowed himself to be brutally honest. He realized that much of his life had been spent chasing validation. He had pursued law not because he loved it, but because it satisfied his parents' expectations. He had entered relationships not out of genuine affection, but out of a need for approval and reassurance. Once he acknowledged these truths, he began to reshape his life according to his own principles rather than the desires of others. Ryan also started practicing solitude reflection, a Stoic exercise where one intentionally spends time alone to examine their own thoughts and motivations. Every weekend, he would retreat to a nearby park without his phone or any distractions. He would sit in silence, observing his own mind, questioning his own desires. Over time, this practice allowed him to strip away the layers of conditioning and expectation that had clouded his true self. Understanding himself made Ryan's approach to relationships fundamentally different. When he finally began dating again, he was no longer desperate for approval. He could appreciate his partner without losing himself in the process. He was able to set healthy boundaries, communicate openly, and most importantly, maintain his own identity, regardless of the relationship's success or failure. The Stoics believed that knowledge of oneself is essential for tranquility and fulfillment. Seneca once wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Self-knowledge is built through struggle, through examining your own desires, fears, and motivations with brutal honesty. It is only by confronting your own nature that you can truly love another without losing yourself. If you want to apply this principle in your own life, start by asking yourself a few fundamental questions. What do I truly value? What are my own goals, separate from the expectations of others? What kind of relationship do I truly want? Write down your answers. Revisit them regularly. Be willing to change them as you grow, but always ensure they are rooted in your own desires, not the desires of others. Another effective practice is to set aside time each day for solitary reflection. This doesn't mean withdrawing from the world completely, but rather creating space to examine your own thoughts and motivations without interference. By doing so, you cultivate a deeper understanding of yourself, which in turn strengthens your ability to love others authentically. Ultimately, understanding yourself before loving others is not about rejecting relationships. It is about ensuring that your love is grounded in clarity, strength, and self-respect. When you know who you are and what you want, you are free to love without fear of losing yourself. And that is the kind of love that endures. Number 6. Do not let the past dictate the present. Remember, no man loses any other life than the one he now lives, nor lives any other than the one he now loses. Marcus Aurelius. The Stoic emperor's words cut through illusion like a knife. To him, clinging to the past was not only irrational, but self-destructive. The only moment you ever truly possess is the present. Allowing past pain to infect the present is like poisoning the well from which you drink. The past is a weight, and if you let it, it will drag you down into bitterness, regret, and insecurity. Many people unknowingly carry the wounds of their past into their present relationships, projecting old fears and traumas onto new partners who had nothing to do with the original pain. The result is often conflict, distrust, and emotional distance. Consider the story of Emily Wright, a 32-year-old teacher from Denver. After experiencing a toxic and emotionally abusive relationship during her early 20s, Emily swore to never let herself be vulnerable again. Her ex-boyfriend had manipulated her, isolated her from her friends, and constantly criticized her appearance and ambitions. When she finally broke free, she vowed to build walls around her heart so high that no one could ever hurt her like that again. Years later, Emily met Sam, a kind and understanding man who genuinely loved her for who she was. Yet, despite his patience and compassion, Emily found herself sabotaging the relationship. She questioned his motives, doubted his sincerity, and became defensive at the slightest hint of criticism. The ghost of her past relationship haunted her thoughts, turning her affection into suspicion. And just like that, a promising relationship began to deteriorate, not because of Sam's actions, but because of Emily's inability to leave her pain behind. It was during a visit to a friend's cabin that Emily finally confronted her demons. Alone in the quiet of nature, she began to read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. One passage stood out. "Today, I escaped from anxiety. Or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside." Emily realized her suffering was not caused by Sam or even her ex-boyfriend. It was her own mind replaying the same painful script over and over again. From a psychological perspective, Emily's struggle was a classic example of emotional conditioning. According to research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, past traumas can create cognitive distortions, faulty patterns of thinking that influence how we perceive and react to new experiences. For Emily, her past relationship had conditioned her to see love through a lens of mistrust and insecurity. Unless she changed that lens, every new relationship would be tainted by old pain. Emily decided to adopt a Stoic approach to healing. Inspired by Marcus Aurelius's teachings, she began to challenge her own thoughts, asking herself, "Is my pain real, or am I simply reliving old wounds? Is this distrust rooted in reality, or is it the echo of a broken past?" By questioning her assumptions, she started to dismantle the illusions that had been holding her back. One powerful technique Emily used was cognitive reframing, a practice that aligns closely with Stoic principles. Instead of allowing herself to react automatically to perceived threats, she would pause, reflect, and choose her response. When doubts or insecurities surfaced, she would write them down and analyze them with a rational mind. "Is this fear justified?" she would ask herself. "Or am I letting the past speak for me?" Another method Emily embraced was journaling for clarity. Each night, she wrote about her thoughts and emotions, dissecting them with objectivity. This practice allowed her to identify patterns of irrationality and replace them with healthier perspectives. She also practiced negative visualization, a Stoic exercise where she imagined losing Sam, not to create anxiety, but to foster gratitude for the present moment. By acknowledging the impermanence of all things, she learned to appreciate what she had without clinging to it. Over time, Emily's approach began to change. She stopped projecting her past pain onto Sam and started appreciating him for who he truly was. Instead of doubting his kindness, she embraced it. Instead of anticipating betrayal, she chose to enjoy the connection they shared. Her ability to be present in the moment rather than trapped in old fears strengthened their relationship and brought her peace of mind. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics knew centuries ago. The past is only as powerful as you allow it to be. Trauma may shape you, but it does not define you. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on new experiences and habits, proves that you can change your mental patterns. By practicing mindfulness and embracing rational thought, you can break free from the chains of your past. To apply this principle in your own life, start by acknowledging the emotional wounds you carry. Write them down, describe them in detail, and confront them head-on. Ask yourself, am I reacting to my current relationship, or am I reacting to a past one? The more you identify these distortions, the easier it becomes to dismantle them. Another powerful exercise involves creating a pain inventory. List every painful experience that still influences your emotions and actions. Then, for each item, write down how it affects your present relationships. Be brutally honest. If you find yourself blaming others for old wounds, acknowledge it. If you are holding on to resentment or fear, admit it. This process may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary for growth. The Stoics also taught the importance of letting go. To truly love without pain, you must release your grip on the past. That doesn't mean ignoring it or pretending it never happened. It means recognizing that it is no longer real. It is a memory, a shadow, not something that should control your present happiness. Emily's journey was not easy, but it was transformative. By accepting the truth that the past could no longer hurt her unless she allowed it to, she regained control over her own emotions. She learned to appreciate love for what it was, rather than what her fears tried to make it out to be. The past will always be there. It is part of your story, but it is not your entire story. To love without pain, you must be willing to leave behind the chapters that no longer serve you. The Stoics believed that wisdom comes from understanding what you can control and what you cannot. You cannot change your past, but you can change how you react to it. Ultimately, to free yourself from the chains of the past is to reclaim your power in the present. And when you learn to do that, you will be able to love with clarity, peace, and resilience. Number 7. Build your own strong life. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus. The Stoics understood a truth that many fail to grasp. True fulfillment comes from within. It is not granted by relationships, status, or material wealth. It is something you build with intention, discipline, and resilience. When you have a life that is rich and meaningful on its own, love becomes an addition, not a necessity. It enhances your happiness, but never defines it. The problem most people face is that they try to fill the gaps in their own lives with the presence of others. They seek out relationships not from a place of abundance, but from a place of scarcity. The result is dependency, insecurity, and ultimately, disappointment. When you expect another person to provide you with what you lack within yourself, you are setting them up for failure and yourself up for pain. Consider the story of David Torres, a 35-year-old entrepreneur from Austin, Texas. For years, David believed that success meant building a company that everyone admired. He poured his energy into his work, neglecting his health, personal growth, and social life. But deep down, he wasn't building a life he loved. He was building a facade meant to impress others. His relationships were shallow and transactional. He dated women who valued his status more than his character, and friendships that were built on mutual convenience rather than genuine connection. Everything changed when David experienced a financial crisis that nearly destroyed his business. Investors pulled out, projects collapsed, and his carefully constructed image crumbled. Alone and exhausted, he realized that his life had been nothing more than a collection of external validations. When those validations disappeared, so did his sense of worth. Desperate for clarity, David turned to Stoic philosophy, particularly the writings of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. One passage from Meditations struck him deeply. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The message was clear. If David wanted to build a fulfilling life, he had to start from within. The first step he took was stripping away everything unnecessary. He simplified his lifestyle, cutting out superficial friendships and distractions. He began a daily practice of journaling, writing down his goals, values, and aspirations. By doing this, he identified what truly mattered to him, separate from the expectations of others. This exercise helped him redefine success, not as wealth or recognition, but as personal growth, creativity, and integrity. David also embraced solitude reflection. Inspired by Marcus Aurelius's habit of retreating into himself, he dedicated 1 hour every morning to pure contemplation. No phone, no emails, no social media. Just him, his thoughts, and the freedom to explore them. This practice allowed him to reconnect with his own desires, undisturbed by outside influence. Building his own strong life required David to develop a wide range of skills, not just professionally, but personally. He took up martial arts to improve his discipline and resilience. He started reading books outside of his field to broaden his understanding of the world. He cultivated genuine friendships based on shared values rather than superficial interests. And most importantly, he built a lifestyle that he enjoyed even when no one was around to witness it. David's journey illustrates a core Stoic principle: self-sufficiency. The Stoics believed that the key to fulfillment was building a life that could withstand the inevitable losses and setbacks of existence. To them, resilience was not about avoiding pain, but about having the strength to endure it without losing your sense of purpose. Modern psychology supports this approach. Research on self-determination theory suggests that people are happiest when their lives are built on autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When you have control over your own actions, when you feel skilled and capable in your pursuits, and when you cultivate meaningful connections, your happiness becomes sustainable. It is not dependent on external approval or temporary pleasure. Imagine your life as a fortress. If the walls are weak and poorly constructed, any storm will tear them down. But if the walls are strong, built from principles and skills that are genuinely your own, they will stand firm even when the world turns against you. Relationships are like gardens within the fortress. Beautiful, enriching, but never the foundation. When you build your life on solid ground, love becomes something you can offer freely rather than something you desperately need. If you want to apply this principle in your own life, start by identifying your core values. Write them down and ask yourself, are these values truly mine, or are they borrowed from others? If your goals are driven by societal expectations rather than personal conviction, you will always feel unfulfilled. Redefine success according to your own standards and build your life around those principles. Another practical exercise is to create a personal growth plan. Outline the skills you want to develop, the knowledge you want to acquire, and the habits you want to cultivate. Focus on building resilience, creativity, and emotional intelligence. These are strengths that cannot be taken away by external circumstances. David also practiced a technique known as voluntary discomfort, inspired by Seneca's teachings. He would deliberately expose himself to uncomfortable situations, cold showers, intense workouts, difficult conversations, to strengthen his mind and build confidence. This practice taught him that true strength comes from confronting challenges head-on, rather than avoiding them. As David built his own strong life, his relationships improved as well. Because he no longer sought validation from others, he was free to offer genuine affection. He no longer clung to relationships out of fear or insecurity. Instead, he embraced them for what they were: beautiful, fleeting experiences that could enhance his happiness but never define it. The Stoics taught that fulfillment comes not from the approval of others, but from living according to your own principles. When you build a life that is rich, meaningful, and resilient, love becomes a choice rather than a necessity. It becomes something you offer freely rather than something you desperately seek. Ultimately, building your own strong life means creating a foundation that no one can destroy. It means developing the skills, habits, and mindset that allow you to thrive regardless of external circumstances. When you reach that point, love is no longer a crutch or a distraction. It is a gift, something that enhances your life rather than completes it. And when you love from that place of strength, you are truly free. Conclusion: the journey to loving without pain is not about abandoning love, but transforming the way you approach it. Stoicism teaches that true love is not rooted in attachment, dependency, or control. It is grounded in acceptance, resilience, and freedom. When you build a life that is strong, meaningful, and fulfilling on its own, love becomes an enhancement, not a necessity. It becomes something you offer freely, rather than something you desperately need. Through practicing detachment, embracing impermanence, understanding yourself, and building a strong personal foundation, you unlock a kind of love that is pure and resilient. This is not a love that breaks under pressure or fades with time. It is a love that endures precisely because it is not clinging, desperate, or afraid. As the Stoics taught, true power comes from within, and true love is simply an extension of that power. If you found value in what you've learned today, if you're ready to reclaim your power and love from a place of strength and freedom, then make sure to support this channel. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to Victory Stoic for more content designed to sharpen your mind and fortify your soul. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Write, "I will love with strength and freedom." Or even better, share your own journey. Tell me about the battles you've faced in love, the lessons you've learned, or how you've transformed pain into power. Your story matters. It can inspire others just as much as the wisdom of the Stoics has inspired you. Thank you for listening to this video. Remember, true love is not something you find in another person. It is something you build within yourself. And when you do that, you can offer love freely, without fear, without pain. This is Victory Stoic, where we transform weakness into strength and love into freedom. Until next time, stay strong, stay resilient, and never stop striving for mastery.